the month where I think the pushback began. We've had a lot of legacy media having a snipe at the David Grusch story, and my good friend and colleague, Bryce Zabel, my golly, he's been gallivanting around Scandinavia having a good time, haven't you, mate?
I've been traveling in both Sweden and Finland for the last, 2.5 weeks. My oldest son got married to a Swedish woman, so I was there for the wedding, and it was lovely. And of course, Sweden plays a very important role in UFO history, and I'm going to save that with make that a little tease, and we'll come back to it later on in the show. But yeah, a lot of things have been going on, and I know you've been in the thick of it, so I'm going to let you carry the ball to get us started, and then I'll chime in with my usual whatever you would want to call that.
One of the worst was an attempt by the Washington Post to misrepresent a story that was posted by The Intercept, which essentially was a smear job on David Grusch. Quite a hateful, quite disgraceful smear job where David, as you know, had raised his PTSD with us in the News Nation interview. He'd done entirely the right thing, and he basically explained how, as a result of the death of a close friend who suicided, David had spiraled into PTSD. It had brought back memories of his own experiences in Afghanistan. He'd hit the bottle, and his wife was concerned. There was a gun in the house, and so she called police. And yes, there were police records, which David had told us all about, wanted us to know about this, which basically raised concerns that he might hurt himself. And so he was. On his own admission, on his own volition, he gave us the information that he'd been admitted to a mental health facility to help him overcome an experience of PTSD. And some pretty low-life grubs in the legacy media and in an online webzine, who I won't distinguish by even naming them, resorted to attempting to smear him. And then, of course, when David was led to the conclusion, because the police had essentially misled him about where those records were released from, they told David that the records were not released by the local police, when in fact they were. He was led to the conclusion that the records came from the intelligence community, which is not an unreasonable conclusion, because that's the only other place they could have come from. But I just want to explain this story because it's very interesting. It shows how disinformation works, and it shows how slime bags in the media are capable of being manipulated to use that disinformation. And so what happened was there was a young dweeb from The Intercept who basically did a story at the suggestion, on his own admission, of people in the intelligence community, which essentially set out to smear David Grusch because he had PTSD. And the obvious inference, and in fact the actual suggestion in the article, was that there was some question about his mental reliability and his veracity as a witness, because of course he had suffered from PTSD and had had suicidal ideation. And as you know, my friend, it all kind of blew up in their face because social media and I think a lot of the other media, including News Nation and The Hill, rightly responded and said, what business was it of theirs to go using PTSD and the issues of mental health caused by battle stress? Why on earth is that relevant to somebody's security classification when the Defense Department has, of course, made the adjudication that it's not an issue at all? But that didn't stop the Washington Post from having a go. And they had a snipe last week, late last Friday, I think it was. And they ran hard, of course, with the idea that News Nation had had to correct the assertion that the documents were leaked from within the intelligence community. And what they didn't admit, of course, was that the police, as we explained, the police had actually given David Grusch false information. And they didn't explain that on his own admission, the reporter from The Intercept admitted that the source for his original tip that led him to the documents that were held by the police department was, surprise, surprise, the intelligence community. And so you have this nasty little hit job from an online webzine given to a very young, very inexperienced reporter who was terribly excited to get a drop, didn't really ask enough questions about why he was being given that drop, didn't ask enough questions about whether it's legitimate to say that somebody's security classification should be taken off them just because they've suffered PTSD, an illness, by the way, that's suffered by 1 in 5 American veterans. You wouldn't have anybody working in the military-industrial complex if you had 1 in 5 American veterans taken from their security clearance. So it was actually quite a shameful, quite sad episode. I actually felt quite sad about it, to be honest, Bryce, because it was a tacky, disgusting slimeball attempt to vilify David Grusch for absolutely no good reason. And quite a shameful incident, frankly.
Well, there's so much to unpack there. First off, Ross, the bit about the tweet bots. I assume you mean X bots right now. There were the X bots taking you on, but I feel really I feel bad that you have to put up with that, because here you are just trying to uh, do the job of a journalist, and you shouldn't have to be subjected to that. But that is the kind of the world we live in right now. It does certainly seem like the last month, if the tide was rolling in the last few months, it started rolling out again last month. Kind of an Empire Strikes Back situation, if you think about it. The thing about the PTSD, and I think this bears some discussion here, is I remember meeting Dave Grusch when you introduced us. That was last May 8th. And I remember him telling me about it, I believe, at that very lunch that we first shared. He wasn't shy about talking about it. He also mentioned that he had a bit of autism that he had, and he didn't seem to be hiding anything. So here's the thing. I wonder, it's not good how it got out. It's not good how the intelligence community started feeding these little tidbits out. But on the other hand, I look at David Grusch as one of the most important people ever to speak his truth in this ufological world that we're talking about. And because he's so important, I mean, isn't his background and all of it fair game? That's what I'm hearing from people. Why wouldn't it be fair game to know about it? It doesn't disqualify him, because remember what I think you said it earlier. Here he has PTSD, a common ailment, and he's willing to talk about it. And he kept his classification, even having these incidents happen. So obviously they were not disqualifying. But is it wrong to talk about the struggles that Dave Grusch has had? Doesn't it make him more solid as a witness if we know what has happened to him? And I say that not wanting anybody to have to go through having their personal lives dragged through. I mean, I wouldn't want it to happen to me, and I wouldn't want it to happen to you, but he is testifying before Congress. He's a whistleblower. He's bringing out information that's the most important information that I've heard in my lifetime in a public setting like that. So is it terrible for the information to come out, or is it terrible the way it came out?
No, it's the way it came out.
Yeah.
It's the fact that somebody's PTSD is used as a smear. I mean, the bottom line is the Washington Post didn't report in its snide hit job on us that the story that was written by The Intercept was actually motivated by a tip from within the intelligence community, which is what The Intercept's reporter actually boasted about in an interview, I think, with the Hills Rising program. And I think that's the issue. The issue is that somebody in the national security establishment, on the reporter's own admission, used personal health information of Mr. Grusch to try and denigrate him. And what I think about that is it goes back to the days of Daniel Ellsberg, a good man who I once had the opportunity to interview, the whistleblower who released the Pentagon Papers in the 1970s under the Nixon regime. And what's amazing to me is the fact that people in the intelligence community would think that somebody who legitimately sought psychiatric treatment for a mental illness caused by their exposure to traumatic stress in their service to their country could somehow be used to denigrate them and essentially to challenge a finding by the Department of Defense's own security division that said, we vetted Mr. Grusch. Yes, he's disclosed to us that he's got this PTSD, but frankly, we accept that he should keep his security clearance. And there were unnamed sources quoted in the Intercept article who basically asserted that they believed that Mr. Grusch should not have been allowed to keep his security clearance. I guess it's fair for the reporter to report that, but I think also it's incumbent on a reporter to ask the question, why am I being leaked this information? Why am I being given this tip?
Absolutely.
I'm being given this tip because, frankly, there are people in the intelligence community right now who want to shut David Grusch down. And that's what's going on. I mean, there's a very clear effort at the moment. And by golly, the pushback, as we'll call this show this week, has begun. There's a pushback from within sections of the compliant media who will basically be fed material by the intelligence community to try and denigrate this whistleblower who has come forward with information in a way and with a detail that has never been presented to the Congress before. And as I said at the head of this program, I think what's happened is the intelligence community has been caught flat-footed. I don't think they knew in the very beginning how to deal with this issue. And so there's been basically 2 months since Mr. Grusch's interview, and they're now scrambling to try and find a way of denigrating him. And frankly, I think it blew up in their face, Bryce.
Sure, and you have to ask yourself not just about the how of this leak or this feeding of information, but the why. I think the why is fairly obvious. One of the things that even Marco Rubio said in an interview that he did, I think less than a month ago, he said that there were numerous other whistleblowers standing by, but they were watching to see how David Grusch and others would be treated as they came forward. And it sure seems like a pretty good message to send out if you don't want people talking about this. And there are whistleblowers standing in the wings trying to, see which way the wind is blowing on this thing. If you show them that David Grusch is going to get attacked for after he's even testified before Congress, that would have a certain chilling effect on other people wanting to come forward. So that's clearly the rationale, as far as I can tell. And it is interesting because this pushback is kind of two-pronged. It is the government, obviously, in some respects. And it's not all of the government. The government's not a monolith any more than anything else. But there are elements within the government that obviously favor keeping this thing on the down low and not making making the whole UFO UAP reality issue something that we are all discussing every day. So they'd like to put that one away for a while. And so clearly there's a motivation to do that. But the pushback is also seeming to come from the media, because I'll tell you the one thing. I was reviewing a lot of articles that have been written, and I've tried to curate the Grusch story as best I could, not only in articles, but also on our YouTube site about things that have been reported about him. And it does seem like when Grusch initially came forward, when your News Nation special, the one that was called We Are Not Alone, aired, I think a lot of people were sort of also taking a wait and see thing, because a lot of the media at that time was like, well, gee, since we're not breaking this, do I really want to cover this Australian journalist, Ross Coulthard, breaking this story with this whistleblower on News Nation? Do I want to give other journalists the credit for this thing? So a lot of people kind of held back. And I noticed that the amount of the negative articles increased only after several weeks after the News Nation break that you had. So I think there's a media pushback and a government pushback, and we can get into this later, but I think it's still doomed to failure. I think you can push back all you want, and you're buying time, but I don't think you're changing history.
I agree with you. And look, the other thing that I think we need to note as an event which is of true significance in the last week or two has been the fact that I think he's the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Turner, who's the congressman from Ohio. He's made it very clear, apparently, behind the scenes, that he is very strongly of the view that there should be no further oversight committee hearings into the allegations raised by Mr. Grusch, certainly not in public hearing. And I'm told there's a real blue underway to try and find out how this leaked, because Turner's angry that it's got out from within Congress that he has interceded. He doesn't want people to know that he's been actively involved in trying to stop the David Grusch evidence from being further presented to Congress. And there's been, I think, instigated intercession by him to stop any further public hearings in the House. And so where we are at the moment is there's a big question mark about what's going to happen next. There's an enormous question mark over whether in September, when the House resumes, will the Senate, particularly will Senator Gillibrand and members of the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, use one of their subcommittees to hold further hearings. And moreover, even if that subcommittee does hold further hearings, will the witnesses be allowed to testify in circumstances and under terms and conditions that allow them to explain what they know? This is the next big issue, because frankly, the pushback is more happening behind the scenes. I'm talking to people in the Congress who are telling me that the lobbying from the Pentagon and the intelligence community is intense. It's being made very, very clear by very powerful members of the intelligence community, if you like, the gatekeepers to a lot of this information, that they do not want public hearings. And if the comments attributed to Congressman Turner are correct, he's actually acknowledged, apparently, that this could be embarrassing to the Defense Department if this information was released. Yeah. Well, embarrass away. Let's expose it.
I think it is embarrassing. It's interesting, by the way. I just point out, I don't know if we can make anything of this, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe Mike Turner is the congressman who represents the district that has Wright-Patterson in it. And of course, for those of you listening in, Wright-Patterson is where allegedly the Roswell wreckage was, some of it anyway, was first sent there. And Wright-Patterson was also the place where Project Blue Book was centered during the 50s and 60s. So kind of an important area. And I think Mike Turner knows a lot more about this issue than he would be comfortable getting out. And Ross, one thing I did want to kind of ask you about, because one of the leaders from Congress has been Tim Burchett, obviously, the congressman from, I think it's Tennessee, right? And yeah, you do a great you do a great voice of this guy. So listen, he's really taken center stage over the last year. I think we've watched him go from being sort of a voice on the side to a voice right squarely in the center, who is willing to say in that wonderful drawl of his, it's a cover up, as you said. And I saw a bit of an interview with him recently where he sounded a little bit defeated, like he was actually admitting that the pushback was greater than he anticipated, which I wonder, do you think that even the Congress people who seem to have had such a head of steam to push this forward, do you think that they're feeling the winds blowing against them as well?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, you and I had a show a couple of weeks ago where we talked about whether there was going to be a sizzle or a fizzle, and I was very distinctly a fizzle. I do think at the moment the pushback is winning. One of the big things that's being fought against, and this is one to watch, this is why it's so important that people write letters to their congressional representative or to their senator, because the next few months are absolutely crucial. Firstly, the Chuck Schumer legislation. We know that there is proposed legislation before the House that refers to non-human intelligence or non-human technology over 20 times. And this Schumer amendment is meant to go into the National Defense Authorization Act, the appropriations legislation for the Pentagon and the intelligence community, which would be passed normally towards the end of December, at the end of this year. And so it's the appropriations for the money to keep the Defense Department running for 2024. And at the moment, Chuck Schumer, who is the Senate Majority Leader, has got this incredible, like unprecedented piece of legislation into the proposed NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. But I can tell you the pushback is intense. There are Pentagon lobbyists who are trying to get these references to essentially demanding that aerospace companies and the defense and intelligence community fess up about any non-human intelligence or any non-human technology. They're fighting to stop that legislation from going through. Now, this is really important.
Sure.
This matters because ultimately what happens in Congress, it really only happens because people say they want what they want, and they're doing what they think the public want. And I can tell you right now, most Congress people and senators do not think the public really care that much about UAPs. The message is not getting through. And the best example of that, and I want you to talk about this because you did a particularly good post about this week, is that buffoon Governor Christie during the presidential debate being asked the key question about UAPs. And what did we get? We got the usual giggle ridicule.
Yeah. Well,
So
I'll tell you something.
Take us through what happened.
On the sizzle fizzle front for a moment, if you think of the battle for disclosure, the war for disclosure to be the overall large emergence of this reality into our national and international discussion, there are going to be battles, and some of them will be won or lost. So obviously, we're in a battle right now, and we could even lose this battle for a short term, but it doesn't mean the war itself for more transparency is lost. And something else happened. I will get to Christie in a minute. But one of the things that people have said with these indictments, particularly the Georgia one, is no one is above the law. But the idea that no one is above the law may be why there's this pushback. Because I think, as you have said and others have said, Ross, you don't maintain a 75-year cover-up without having to get your hair mussed a little bit. And and even Dave Grusch has said that people have been murdered in order to maintain this secret all this time. So I think it's entirely possible that there is a concern that once you start kicking down all these doors with more congressional hearings to get more and more specific and lay this out in greater and greater detail, and which would energize a lazy media to get back to work on it, then you might turn up some things where people have committed crimes and they will be proven that they're not above the law. So I think there is some of that going on. Now, as for that Republican debate, I watched the debate, and I do actually, I tried to do a deconstructive little video on YouTube. It's about 10 minutes long. And for those of you that can find our YouTube channel, it's right there. A quick summary of it, though, is that this was the first Republican debate. And Ross, you know better than anyone, I've been riding the horse for a long time, that it's inevitable that this topic of UFO, UAP reality, this issue is going to get into presidential debates. And I thought it would get in 2020, didn't really, but literally on the first debate of the season, with that Republican debate, it came barreling in when Fox anchor Martha McCallum asked Chris Christie about it. And he just literally, it was infuriating. Anyone that knows anything about this topic literally had to listen to the guy say that it was a big joke. He made it seem funny that she would pick on him to do this. And the thing is, that stigma, boy, did we get a good example of how stigma works, because she didn't get halfway through her question before Christie was doing his sort of smile and smirk kind of thing. That kind of unnerved her. Then the public kind of—
What did he say? He said, "You're asking me a UFO question?"
Yeah, and then the audience started tittering, and so then she laughed, and Brett Baer, her co-moderator, was smirking, and so it got off to a terrible start, and then he didn't make it any better, and it was just a mess. He didn't really talk about the issue. There was so much that he could have done. And one of the things I tried to do in that thing was just to say, okay, you got a minute to talk. right? You got a minute. That's how these debates are. Do you really want to spend your minute making fun of the topic, or do you want to show that you're up to speed on it? He obviously wasn't up to speed, because I think if he was, he would have had something more to say. It was a
Whereas,
debacle.
can I make this
Yeah,
point, Bryce?
please.
I don't know how you say his first name. I'm presuming it's Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Vivek Ram. Well, actually, we may have that wrong, but I call him Vivek Ramaswamy. Yeah,
Vivek Ramaswamy. He's very impressive. He's a very
yeah.
sharp Republican candidate. And he actually tweeted, David Grusch pointed this out to me just this morning, that Vivek Ramaswamy had actually tweeted very much in support of UFO disclosure.
Yes.
And he's made quite upfront pledges, basically saying that he thinks that there needs to be openness and transparency. And, well, how interesting and how refreshing to have a presidential candidate being prepared to speak candidly without embarrassment. This is what Vivek Ramaswamy said ahead of the House Oversight Committee hearings. He said, "I'm calling on committee members to publicly ask witnesses the following 7 questions. We can handle the truth," he wrote. "Has the US government become aware of actual evidence of ET or otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? If so, when did this first occur? What are the names and titles of the people with direct first-hand knowledge of and access to the crash retrieval programs? Which facilities, material bases, how to recovered material? What special access programs cover this information, and how is it possible they've evaded oversight for so long? When did these programs begin and who authorized them? What level of security clearance is required to fully access these programs? Which private corporations are involved? Has there been an active US government disinformation program?" All really good questions.
Hey,
asked
Ross,
by a
listen,
presidential
we should
candidate.
we got to bring Vivek on as a consultant then, because he's just laid out the topics for the next 10 episodes of Need to Know.
Absolutely.
Listen, I give him points. And in fact, had it not turned into an object of derision in that debate, then it might have become something where other candidates could have weighed in. But it was such a joke by the time Christie got done with his response. There was nothing to go forward with. And frankly, it's kind of strange, because it was certainly presented as a national security kind of thing. And that seems like a valid part of the debate. I just wanted to point out, because I do like the history of it, the last time in a significant way that UFOs got into a presidential debate was in 2007 in one of the Democratic debates. And one of the candidates was Dennis Kucinich, who had been the mayor of Cleveland, who had seen a UFO. And the host, Tim Russert, asked him about it. And the same thing kind of happened, except that Kucinich was trying to be honest and talk about his experience. And it became, again, an audience that didn't want to hear about it. Also, Obama was asked about it in that debate, and I believe he completely pushed the whole topic aside and said, well, he was more worried about the issues here on Earth. I will point out one thing. In 1976, and I love this fact, you had actually 1980 rather. You had Ronald Reagan, the Republican nominee, and Jimmy Carter, the Democratic nominee. And they both, I believe, maybe they only had 2 debates, maybe 3. And it never came up, but both of those candidates had seen a UFO up close and personal. Carter had even filed a report on it, and Reagan, when he saw it in 1974, instructed his pilot to chase it. So it's kind of interesting. There's certainly room in these debates to talk about it, particularly since these days the whole issue has its traction that it has in Congress, specifically because it is a national security issue as it's been presented. So I'm a little, I may be not as optimistic, because if I was a moderator now, I'd be very concerned about trying to bring up the topic again. I mean, Martha McCallum really, think about the humiliation of that for a moderator. You have to laugh at your own question as if you've asked a silly question, because that's the prevailing mood in the room.
Why is it? This is the thing that I didn't understand, is why is it a silly question when the Congress has just held hearings from a major league whistleblower saying that he thinks there's been serious criminal and illegal activities to conceal from Congress?
And clearly Martha McCallum knows this. I kept thinking to myself, okay, does Christie simply not know? Is he uninformed to the degree that he doesn't know that these pilots, these two pilots who are flying, you know, super expensive aircraft for the United States are reporting things they can't explain, and that there's a whistleblower saying that we have crashed craft, and this just happened the month before in Congress, and he doesn't know this? I mean, that was what he should have talked about. He could have simply stated what the situation was and moved on, but he didn't do that. He made it a joke again, and he literally, I got to tell you, where I literally had to, well, I didn't literally do this, but where I felt like I had to tear my fist out of the ceiling was when he invoked Martians, because I just thought, come on, man. That is, as I said in that video, that is so 1950s. We just don't need to be there anymore. So anyway, there is pushback going on, and we're going to be following that. And go right ahead. I see you there. Go.
Yeah, just one thing I want to make a point about, because I want to come back to this. I want people to be very aware of just how important this Schumer legislation is.
Yeah.
It has been conveyed to me by multiple sources now that if that Schumer legislation, the legislation that demands that both the defense and intelligence community and private aerospace reveal what they know about non-human intelligence or non-human intelligence technology, if that amendment doesn't go into the legislation at the end of this year, I'm told any form of public disclosure of what they know will be delayed by years.
That's not a good thought.
And this is what's going on. This is what's happening. And one of the problems, of course, with lobbying in the Congress, the way that it all works is you get some bloke in a uniform turning up to a senator's office, and it's all done behind closed doors. And, you know, bottom line is, why are some of these senators going quiet? I mean, why has Senator Gillibrand, for all her talk, still not met with David Grusch?
Okay. Was that a rhetorical question, and that you actually have an answer? Because what is the answer? What is the answer? Why is she not meeting with him?
I don't know.
And if she's not,
I mean, I get the feeling she's saying one thing publicly, that, you know, I care about this issue. It's important. We should have transparency. We should have accountability. But she keeps on buck passing it back to AARO, the Pentagon's all-domain anomaly resolution office, which is about as effective as a wet piece of lettuce. And the bottom line is AARO still doesn't have a phone number, still doesn't have an email, no website. It's done one tweet. It's not doing its job. And I'm hearing from people who've gone to AARO, I've spoken to a number of people who've testified to AARO, that their relationship and the level of interest that they're getting from AARO has been deeply unsatisfying.
well,
that they're not getting the impression that this is being properly investigated. So you've got a key senator on the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, Senator Gillibrand, who I'm afraid is making all the right noises publicly, saying she's interested in this issue and she's worried about transparency. I'm not seeing a genuine effort on her behalf, or indeed on behalf of other senators, key senators on that committee, genuinely moving to engage with this issue. What we need, for example, is for, say, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, Thomas Monheim. He could be called. He's the guy who's currently investigating Mr. Grusch's complaints. He should be called, because he could once and for all resolve the issue. Why did he find that Mr. Grusch's allegations, his complaints, both about reprisals and also about the illegal operation to hinder congressional oversight of this legacy crash retrieval and reverse engineering program that's alleged to exist, why did he find that allegation from David Grusch to be credible and urgent?
That's what I'd want to haul that man in before Congress if I was working in Congress and ask that question. Okay. One thing that we have to answer for, because in the last Need to Know episode, we talked at length about Arrow's Sean Kirkpatrick, and he and you had just exchanged emails, and there was even some talk that, loose talk maybe, that we might get him on our show. Whatever happened to that?
Not a peep so far. I've made a request for an interview, and he's indicated a willingness to do an interview. I'm told that his office either has been or is about to be moved under the control no longer of Ron Moultrie from USD, the Office of the Undersecretary for Defence Intelligence and Security, and that he's now going to be placed under the control of the Defence Undersecretary, I think, Kathleen Hicks. And that's a positive move because it puts them further up the hierarchy in defence, and it removes them from an office that Lou Elizondo, for example, the former head of the Pentagon's UAP investigation program, believed was obstructing and hindering proper investigation of the UAP issue. So I think there's some progression, I think, for Arrow. It's got a bigger budget. More importantly, it's now under the control of a higher level in the Defense Department, the Undersecretary for Defense. So let's just wait and see. I'm dying. I'd love to do an interview with Dr. Kirkpatrick, but at the moment, what I'm hearing is not positive.
Okay, well, and then the other thing I just thought we should toss out there is we are sort of in an all Grusch all the time kind of mode right now because the other follow-up whistleblowers haven't followed up yet. But we were also in an extended multiple year. Lou Elizondo was everywhere all the time. And now we don't hear from Lou Elizondo hardly at all. Do you happen to know why?
Look, I think what's happened is he's been focusing on his book. I know his book is before the Defence Office of Pre-Publication Security Review because he's a security cleared official. He has to put everything he writes, everything he wants to publish before DOPSA and get their approval, just like David Grusch did to do his interview with me and with Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal. And so the waiting game is on. I haven't heard from Mr. Elizondo whether he's got DOPSA approval, but I do know his publisher is very keen to get his book out there. Oh, by the way, my new edition of In Plain Sight will be out in America in about 4 weeks.
Hold them both up together. They look different. You've got a whole different look. It's a little smaller.
Slightly different cover. Yeah.
Yeah.
They call this the B format edition, I think.
I like it.
Revised and updated.
Well, I can't wait to tell my friends to pick that one up. It's been an important book. Hey, the thing is, when you say, well, Lou Elizondo fell off the map because he's got his book to do. I mean, look, you were updating and writing a book. I'm writing a book right now, but here we are. You can walk and chew gum and at the same time, and you can write a book and appear on a podcast at the same time. I don't know why he has to be completely missing in action, because I'd like to hear more of what Lou has to say about some of these things. Anyway, can we move on? I want to talk about Sweden for a minute.
I want to hear about Sweden.
Okay.
Did you see any UAPs? It's got quite a history.
Well, hey, listen, one of the things that I thought was so great about your book, and certainly one of my interests, is the history of this whole thing. Because again, as we've said many times, this thing didn't start in 2004 with Nimitz. It goes back to at least World War II and maybe beyond World War II. So so we do like to talk history from time to time, and I've been thinking about UFO history a lot because while I was in Sweden, it reminded me very much that in 1946, which is the year after World War II ended, and remember, during World War II, people were seeing Foo Fighters. That was the first time where both American and German pilots were seeing things around them. We've talked about that before, but in 46, after the war's done, the world is on its back. I mean, it was obviously a tough time for the world after World War II. And suddenly, in the summer of 46, primarily, Sweden is being inundated by things flying over it that they started calling ghost rockets, and that over the years, people started to think, well, those must have been, Nazi V2 rockets that were sent out there. And it turns out that that's really a pretty specious argument. The majority of these ghost rocket sightings were described as elongated, sometime with wings or fins, and they had these bright, fiery exhaust trails. So I guess you could think of them as a rocket at that point, but they also were doing maneuvers. They were going in groups. They were going slower than rockets. They certainly weren't meteors, that kind of thing. So it's a fascinating story. It went on in Scandinavia. There were sightings in Norway and also in Finland and really around Europe, but most of them in Sweden. Sweden took it very seriously. We actually sent General Doolittle out to take a look into it, along with General Sarnoff, who were very high up in the U.S. military. And here's what's interesting about it. At the end of the day, we could do a whole show about ghost rockets. We may have already talked about them at length, but the Swedish government actually, at the end of it, came up with their own conclusions, wrote their own report. But what was interesting is that report was never shared with anyone. And then it finally came out in the 90s. And I just wanted to read to you. I looked up what a quote from that report, and here's part of what it says. This is from the Swedish Air Intelligence Service, and it says, quote, "Some reliable and fully technically qualified people have reached the conclusion that these phenomena are obviously the result of a high technical skill, which cannot be credited to any presently known culture on Earth. They are therefore assuming that these objects originate from some previously unknown or unidentified technology, possibly outside the Earth." Okay, so that's 1946. So,
wow. But Bryce, nothing happened. Nothing happened before 2017. I mean,
yes,
seriously,
exactly.
this is what the Pentagon's trying to do.
So
It's trying to control the narrative.
I got a great idea for us, Ross. We talked about it, and I just want to bring our viewers and listeners in, because we got to start with Sweden right now, because I just came back from it. I'm thinking of it, but it lands us in 1946, and frankly, the ghost rockets were the defining moment of 1946 in ufology. What Ross and I are going to try to do from now on is, at the end of each show, we're going to sort of do the highlights of the next year and sort of tell the story of UFOs through its history. So we've done a little bit from 1946 this episode, and next time we'll talk about the mega year of years, 1947. And then as each episode goes on, we'll just move a little bit further down the road, and in about a year, we'll or maybe a little more than a year, because it's been going on that long, we'll finally catch up with the present. And I think it'll be a good thing, because if, as often been said, if you don't know the lessons of history, you're bound to repeat them. And clearly, the history of the UFO story is just so fascinating. I mean, that's why people have libraries like Ross and I have, where we've got 100, 500 books or whatever. And the more you read about it, you realize this isn't all brand new. This has been going on. And the reason I think it's important, Ross, and I know you and I have talked about it, is it's one thing to today say, well, I think maybe those were an American black ops kind of thing, or maybe the Chinese have done it, or maybe the Russians are doing it. But, back in 1946 and 47, when this was starting, I don't think China even had an air force. And Russia certainly didn't have anything that could do any of the things that are being reported, and neither did the United States. We know this for a fact. So when people were reporting these incredible things, and we will be telling people about these incredible things going forward, you can't really say it. You can't. You got to do the math. If it's not us, it's not China, it's not Russia, it's somebody else. And I think this will be a fine little trip through history as we take it over the next episodes.
No, I agree with you. I think it's important to remember that this is not a new phenomenon. It's been around for a long time, and those who constantly go back to the idea that this must be foreign adversary technology, they can't explain the fact that this is technology that was being reported, seen, and even filmed 70, 80 years ago.
I'm ready to get out of here, but I will just end on because we have stirred up a hornet's nest with our sizzle or fizzle debates or whatever. And I just, listen, I don't want to be a Pollyanna. I don't want to be saying it's all going to be beautiful. But I do think that even if Congress is going to get the cold feet, it's not going to matter in the long run. I just don't think you can stop this, Ross. I really think it maybe in 23 it'll slow down, but there's too many people talking about it, too many places looking into it. And if the government doesn't want to lead the parade, then they're going to have to just get in and be one of the floats in it. And that's the way it's going to go down.
Well, I hope you're right, my friend. I'm a little more grim. I just know how Congress works, and I'm not hearing that the right people are engaged.